90 feet per second. That is what it cost you, not the difference. The bill. Because if you walked into a shop and bought the 30-06 over the 308, you paid for that 90 feet per second with about 14% more recoil into your shoulder, roughly 40 cents more on every round you have ever fired, a heavier rifle on a longer action, and the flinch you built at the bench in October that made you pull the shot on that buck at 80 yards. That was the transaction. 90 feet per second in exchange for all of that, on a gap that disappears 50 yards outside of where you are ever going to shoot a deer. Here are the numbers, because nobody ever gives you the numbers. Federal Fusion, 150 grain, same bullet, same production line, same 24-inch test barrel, so nothing is rigged. The .06 leaves at 2,910, the 308 leaves at 2,820, 90 feet per second and about 170 foot-pounds. That is the whole thing your uncle has been arguing about for 40 years. And here is the part that should make you angry. Nobody hid that number from you. It is printed on the side of the box. It has been sitting on the manufacturer's spec sheet since before you were born, public, accurate, free to anybody who wanted to go look. So the question in this video is not what the number is. The question is why, in 70 years, not one person standing behind a gun counter ever said it to you out loud. I worked that counter. I know exactly why. And I am going to tell you before this is over, and you are not going to like the answer because the answer is not a company. It would be a lot easier for everybody if it were a company. I have watched this play out about 1,000 times. A guy walks in, he is buying his first real deer rifle, or he is buying one for his kid, and he already knows what he wants because his uncle told him he wants the .06, because the .06 hits harder. And when you ask him how much harder, he does not have a number. Nobody has a number. That is the tell. Everybody in this country knows the .06 hits harder, and not one of them can tell you by how much, because the second the number is on the table, the argument stops being an argument and starts being a receipt. If you want more of this, the stuff nobody at the counter says out loud, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it is the only thing keeping this channel running. So let's do the thing nobody does. Let's put both of these on the same page with the same bullet, and let's stop comparing a hot .06 load against a mild 308 load, which is how 90% of the arguments on the internet get won. Same Federal Fusion line, 165 grain now, because that's what a lot of guys load for deer and elk. 24-inch test barrel, and I want to keep saying that because barrel length is where these comparisons get quietly rigged. .06 2,790 feet per second, 2,852 foot-pounds. 308, 2,700, 2,671. 90 feet per second again. 181 foot-pounds. Go heavier, because heavier is supposed to be where the .06 pulls away. Hornady Precision Hunter, 178 grain ELD-X. .06 at 2,750, 308 at 2,600, 150 feet per second. That's the biggest gap in the whole comparison, and it shows up on a bullet weight most deer hunters will never buy. Here's how you translate that into something you can feel. The .06 buys you about 50 yards. That's it. That's the payoff. Whatever the 308 is doing at 200 yards, the .06 is doing at roughly 250. Whatever your reliable expansion window is on the 308, add 50 yards for the .06. 50 yards. Now sit that 50 yards next to a real number. There's a South Carolina study from the mid-1990s run by Dr. Charles Ruth, where they use tracking dogs to verify hits and misses instead of just taking hunters at their word about how far the shot was. Average shot distance on deer came out to 132 yards. Field and Stream puts the typical number at about 100 yards or less. So the extra 50 yards the .06 gives you sits entirely outside the window where almost every deer in this country actually gets shot. You are paying for range you will not use on an animal that is not going to file a complaint either way. One caveat, because that average is heavily eastern. If you're in hardwoods in Pennsylvania or a swamp in Alabama, your average shot is closer to 50 yards, and this whole conversation is even more pointless. If you're glassing mule deer across a canyon in Wyoming at 350, the 50 yards start to mean something. Not much, but something. So if you're a Western hunter stretching it every season, the .06 argument has actual weight. For everybody else, it doesn't. Which brings us to the part that makes this a lie instead of just a disagreement, and it's the history, and almost nobody tells it correctly. The 30-06 was adopted in 1906. It went through both world wars in the Springfield and then the Garand. 2 generations of American men came home already knowing how to shoot one, and they bought hunting rifles chambered in the thing they trusted. That's not marketing. That's something better than marketing. That's a cartridge with a war record. Then, after the Second War, the Army wanted the same performance out of a shorter case. Shorter action, more rounds per soldier, better function in a semi-auto. Frankfurt Arsenal worked the T65 family, and it turned into the T65E5. Winchester released the civilian version as the 308 Winchester in 1952. NATO adopted the 7.62 by 51 in 1954. The M14 replaced the Garand in 1957. Read that again. The 308 was engineered to match the .06, not to beat it. The brief was logistics, not power. It worked so well that the gap came out to 90 feet per second, and then the shooting public spent 70 years pretending 90 feet per second was a canyon. And there's a piece of engineering underneath it that almost nobody hears. The 308 case holds about 21% less powder. On paper, the .06 should walk away. It doesn't because Sammy rates the 308 at 62,000 psi against 60,000 for the .06. The smaller case runs hotter. The .06 is held down because it's a 1906 design that has to stay safe in rifles built before your grandfather was born. The little cartridge closes the gap with pressure. That's why the case size hunch everybody carries around is wrong. There's a second belief riding the other direction, so let's kill that one too. The 308 is more accurate. It has a real origin. For decades, the high-power matches and the service rifle teams ran 308, so the barrels, the brass, and the load data all piled up there. 50 years of people obsessing over one cartridge will do that. It does not mean the case is magically more accurate. Put a factory hunting rifle in each chambering on a bench with the same ammunition and that edge evaporates. Your barrel, your bedding, and your trigger decide your group long before your head stamp gets a vote. One condition does shift the math, and it matters more now than it did 10 years ago. Short barrels and suppressors. The 308 runs faster powders. The .06 leans on slower ones that need barrel length to finish burning. Cut both to 16 or 18 inches, and the .06 gives up more velocity than the 308 does. That 90 feet per second gets smaller, not bigger, on exactly the kind of compact rifle people are buying today. So now I owe you the answer I promised. Why nobody behind the counter ever says the number out loud. I went looking for the easy version first, and I want you to know I went looking, because the easy version would have made a better video. I went hunting for an ad, a catalog page, a spec sheet, a piece of packaging, anything from a major ammunition maker that states something false about this comparison. It is not there. Nobody printed a lie. The numbers have been public and accurate the entire time. Which is worse? Sit with that for a second because it is worse. A false ad is a thing you can point at. A false ad has a name on it, a legal department, an address, a company that can be sued, and a company that can be shamed. What happened here has none of that. What happened here is that the truth was left lying in the open on the box, and an entire industry found it more convenient to let you keep believing the other thing. Here is the counter version, and this is the part I actually saw. A guy comes in wanting the .06 because his uncle said so. I am not going to spend 11 minutes in a chronograph argument talking him out of a rifle he already wants in front of 4 other customers on commission when the sale closes either way, and he will never come back to tell me the deer died the same. So I say, good choice, that thing hits hard. And now he tells his kid. Multiply that by every counter in America, every Saturday for 70 years. Add the magazines which hedged for 4 decades because both cartridges buy advertising. Add the forums where the guy with the .06 is defending a purchase and the guy with the 308 is defending a purchase, and nobody in that thread is neutral. Add your uncle who heard it from his uncle. Nobody sold you this lie. Everybody did, for free forever, and not one person was ever on the hook for it. There is no defendant. That is why it survived 70 years when the number that kills it has been on the box the whole time. All right, if the ballistics don't decide it, something has to. 3 things do, and they all point the same direction. Recoil. 8-pound rifle, 165-grain bullet, roughly 46 grains of powder in the .6 against about 44 in the .308, run through the standard free recoil formula. You land around 20 foot-pounds for the .6 and around 17 for the .308. That's 14%, and those are published numbers, not mine, and they move a lot depending on what your rifle weighs. 14% sounds like nothing until you understand what recoil costs you. It doesn't cost comfort, it costs flinch. Every guy who yanks a shot on a buck at 80 yards yanked it because his body learned something at the bench in October. .308 by a clear margin, and a bigger margin for a new hunter or a kid than the number suggests. Action length. The .308 runs in a short action. Same model rifle, the short action version comes in lighter. A Browning X-bolt in .308 runs about 4 ounces under the same rifle in .6. 4 ounces is nothing on the rack, and it's not nothing on day 4 of an elk hunt. The bolt throw is shorter, which matters if you're ever taking a follow-up shot on a running animal. Not a huge advantage, but measurable and repeatable across almost every catalog. And then ammunition, which is the one that actually closes the argument. As of August 2026, Ammo Bin's tracking has .308 averaging about $1.69 a round, with a median around $1.50. .6 is sitting around $2.12 on a 120-day average. In bulk, they converge, both down around 58 to 60 cents. And in premium, they're a wash. Federal Fusion is the same $54.99 either way. So the .308's price advantage isn't in the box you carry into the woods. It's in the box you shoot at the range, which loops right back to the recoil point. Cheaper practice ammo plus less recoil equals more rounds downrange equals a hunter who can actually shoot. On selection, one major online retailer lists around 172 .308 loads against 116 in .6. The .6 pulls ahead in exactly one place, heavy bullets. In 180 grain, Midway USA carries 36 .6 loads against 16. 220 grain basically only exists in .6. Before I give you the verdict, one thing. Nobody pays me to say any of this. No sponsor, no affiliate links, no company sending me boxes. Which means when I tell you one of these is the better buy, the only thing riding on it is whether you come back. That's the arrangement, and I'd rather have it than the other one. Here's the verdict, and it's not the one the culture gives you. For a deer hunter in the United States buying a rifle today, the .308 Winchester is the better purchase. Not because it's more powerful, it isn't. Not because it's more accurate, that's a match shooting inheritance and it doesn't survive contact with a factory hunting rifle. It wins because every axis that actually changes your outcome in the field, recoil, rifle weight, practice cost, load availability, tilts its way, and the one axis where the .6 wins is a 50-yard advantage that sits outside where you're going to shoot. The honest case for the .30-06 is narrower than its reputation, and it's completely real. If you're hunting elk or big bear as much as you're hunting deer, if you want 200 to 220 grain bullets, if you're a western hunter regularly working past 300 yards, the .6 is your cartridge and the extra energy is not imaginary. That's the criterion. Heavy bullets and big animals, not deer. And if you already own one of these, do not trade it. There is no ballistic reason to switch in either direction. If you've got an .6 in the safe and you hunt whitetails with it, selling it to buy a .308 is setting money on fire so you can shoot a deer that dies exactly the same way. The only legitimate reason to switch is platform. You want lighter, you want a short action, you want cheaper range ammo, you want a semi-auto. That's convenience, and convenience is a real reason to spend money, but call it what it is. Don't tell yourself it's performance. Both of these kill deer, and have for longer than anybody watching has been alive. Neither is obsolete, and neither is a toy. What happened is that 90 feet per second got repeated until it grew into a personality, and now there are men who won't shoot the other one out of loyalty to a gap they couldn't measure if you handed them a chronograph. The question was never which cartridge. The question is which rifle you shoot well and which ammunition you can afford to shoot enough of to find out. Answer those two and the head stamp stops mattering. It stopped mattering in 1952 when a team of engineers set out to match the 30-06 in a shorter case and got within 90 feet per second of it on the first try. They knew what they'd built. Everybody else spent 70 years arguing about it.